Hi, my name is Alison Pulker and I'm a food researcher at the African Centre for Cities. From the story of Feeding Nosipho, we have seen that the urban system has a profound impact on food access in cities. If you have not yet watched Feeding Nosipho, you will find it in Module 1 of this course. In this video, I will be unpacking urban systems and food access in more detail and using examples from the Nosipho story to illustrate the ways in which the urban system can enable or restrict access to food. I will start by defining what we mean by the urban system. As we have already heard in other sections, the urban system is a complex and interconnected network of various systems that profoundly impact on urban food access. I'll then use two examples from the Nosipho story to illustrate how the urban system affects food access. I focus specifically on land use planning and infrastructure failure to highlight the ways in which the urban system contributes towards restricting access to food for many urban residents. So, what is the urban system? Your initial thoughts might be that the urban system refers to things like sewerage, water pipes, electric cables, road networks, and many other forms of physical urban infrastructure. And while these physical infrastructures are indeed part of the urban system, it does not tell us the complete story. The urban system, in the case of this course, refers to the entire urban space and the actions that take place within and as a result of interaction with urban contexts. In other words, the urban system relates to the various elements that interconnect to create a city. And as Carolyn Steele has argued, because of these interconnected and overlapping interactions, in order to understand cities, we need to look at them through food. Similarly, in order to understand food, we need to understand the urban systems in which food circulates, how and when it is produced, accessed, and utilized. What this approach shows us is that the urban system is about both the physical as well as the bureaucratic infrastructures. Land use and spatial planning policies and legislation are also examples of the urban system. When thinking about the urban system in relation to food, it is important to acknowledge the way in which these forms of infrastructure interact with one another to restrict or enable access to food. In Feeding Nosipho, we are provided with various examples of intersecting events that occur as a result of Nosipho and her family living in an urban area that relate to the role of land use and spatial planning. Land use refers to the specific activities that are permitted to take place on a particular piece of land, such as residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, or recreational uses. It is a broader concept that encompasses all the activities and purposes for which a particular piece of land is used. These uses are often a result of a city's zoning scheme. Zoning is the process of planning for land use by allowing or restricting certain land uses in a certain geographic area. Spatial planning, on the other hand, refers to the long-term strategic planning of spaces across various scales. Spatial planning is an interdisciplinary practice that engages multiple stakeholders and takes into account economic, social, cultural, and physical elements involved in planning in order to promote sustainable, equitable development of cities. For example, a main feature of Nosipho's day is her time at her creche, or Early Childhood Development Center, ECD. At the ECD, Nosipho receives a lunch of pap and veg, one of her main meals for the day. This meal is funded through her fees, and if it is a formally registered ECD, the center would be eligible for various ad hoc state grants and funding opportunities. Unregistered ECDs are still able to provide some form of food, but because money is scarce, these meals are usually quick, cheap, and not very nutritious. Previous research in Cape Town has highlighted the difficulty of registering ECDs as formal centres, meaning that the centres which operate informally do not receive the same level of state support as those that are able to register, which means having inadequate subsidies to feed the kids. While this registration is a clear necessity, the majority of informal ECD centres have tried to receive formal registration, but often these are lengthy, complex processes that rely on local land use planning regulations. Land use planning dictates where these centres can operate and what infrastructure is required in relation to these centres. This shows that the issue is not easily solved, but systemic and entwined with various other urban processes. Another example which illustrates the role that the urban system plays in Nosipho's daily food access is through the placement of informal food traders that she and her mother visit. In many African cities, as we have heard in other sections of this course, the informal economy plays a vital role in providing food access to the urban poor, particularly where the formal food sector cannot. However, despite this important role, informal food traders face threat of fines and impoundment of their stock if they are operating without a license or in an area that is not specified for traders due to certain land use regulations. Informal vendors can also be evicted from an area due to the city having development plans for that specific area of land. Often this happens without consultation. For example, in Langa, Cape Town, a bustling informal food market was removed to make space for a new supermarket. When this happened, the city promised to provide the informal traders with trade spaces. However, many years later this has still not happened. One way in which cities could assist in utilizing the urban system to enable as opposed to restrict access to food for the urban poor would be to revisit certain land use regulations to allow for simpler, more efficient ECD registration processes, as well as the demarcation of informal trade spaces in accessible and convenient places for those that live in and commute through certain spaces. Feeding Nosipho also highlights that there are various different forms of failed infrastructure that impact on food access. Nosipho's mother is afraid of her playing in the puddles that are caused by potholes and leaking pipes because of unmaintained road systems and solid waste management. But while these are immediate failures, other long-term infrastructure failures are also illustrated. For example, Nosipho's mother makes a daily choice about food in relation to what forms of energy she has available. While this choice is immediate, the legacy of Cape Town's colonial formation impacts on this decision-making. The provision of physical infrastructure services, such as water, electricity, and sanitation services, were, under apartheid, never intended to service all citizens. Rather, these basic services were only intended for the white minority. The physical infrastructure networks that are available today are not sufficient to service the entire city, and often the urban poor bear the brunt of this failure. Another example from Nosipho's story of how the failure of physical infrastructure restricts her access to nutritious food is the example of how her family is not able to refrigerate food. This is for a number of reasons, which could include a combination of any of the following factors. Space limitations. Her family does not have the physical space to store food in their house. Financial limitations. The initial cost of an appliance such as a fridge is likely too expensive for the majority of families like Nosipho's. And energy considerations. Nosipho's mother makes a daily decision to prepare a specific type of meal based on the energy resources she has available and the cost of these resources. Electricity is both scarce and expensive, which limits the types of food Nosipho's mother is able to buy and prepare. As a result, Nosipho's family relies on getting their fresh vegetables for a meal directly from an informal vendor, often on a daily basis. Without this vendor, Nosipho's family would likely not be able to access fresh, affordable vegetables. The urban system can restrict food access. These are clear examples of how the urban system restricts access to food in various ways, either through bureaucratic regulations such as land use planning and policies, or through failed infrastructure and unequal distribution of resources. But how can the urban system enable greater food access to affordable, safe, and nutritious food? One way is through the investment in ECD centres to enable these centres to provide regular and more nutritious meals for their students. Another is through the support of informal vendors through meaningful engagement and negotiated consensus. The improvement of basic services such as water, solid waste management, and electricity provision would also allow for families like Nosipho's to have access to hygienic, safe, and affordable ingredients for a variety of food options. Finally, it's important to remember that while the urban system encompasses various other systems, it does not operate in isolation to other important systems which influence how urban residents access food. I have touched on land use planning and failing infrastructure for this video, but other systems such as the economic system, social systems, health systems, the social services system, and the food system itself all interact to either enable or restrict access to food in cities. Each of these systems is governed by their own regulations and managed by different government entities. The shape of these systems can change from city to city and are shaped by local municipal mandates and objectives. Through understanding these systems in your own city and recognizing how they interact with each other, we can start to see how multi-sectoral, collaborative, and multi-governmental approaches are required to create a more just and equitable urban food system.